Welcome to today's telephone town hall. Tonight we'll be discussing the facts behind Measure 92 on your ballot this November. If you have a question at any time during this event, please press 0 on the call. On the agenda for tonight's call, we'll be discussing Measure 92, how it impacts us as Oregon consumers, how it impacts Oregon family farmers, how it impacts Oregon businesses, and how it will impact our total state economy. Again, if you're just joining us, welcome to today's telephone town hall. Tonight we'll be discussing the facts behind Measure 92 on your ballot this November. If you have a question at any time during the event, please press 0 on the call. Again, on the agenda for tonight's call, we'll be discussing Measure 92, how it will impact us all as Oregon consumers, how it will impact our Oregon family farmers, how it will impact our Oregon businesses, and how it will impact our Oregon economy. We have two fantastic speakers tonight. Our first speaker is Ruth Carey. Ruth is a registered dietitian and nutritionist with more than 35 years in food, science, and nutrition. She has spent her career helping consumers, families, and sports teams choose the right food for their health and well-being. She's also a mother and a new grandmother. Hello, Ruth.
Hi, Colin, and hello, and thank you all for joining our tele-town hall this evening. Hopefully we can answer your questions about ballot measure 92. As a registered dietitian and nutritionist, I have three main concerns about ballot measure 92. The first is that it will provide misleading information to consumers. It won't tell consumers which ingredients in foods are GMO or what percentage of the product is GMO. And many foods would be labeled GMO even if no GE ingredients, and many others would be exempt even if made or containing GE products. My second big concern is cost. I am afraid consumers will pay more for foods when we live in a state where there's very high food insecurity. And with that cost will come no real benefit of nutritional value or improved food safety. My third concern is that Measure 92 conflicts with existing nationwide food labeling. We already have federal labeling laws that define GMO, and if consumers do not want GMO or GE products in their food, they can currently buy organic or non-GMO. So these are some of my concerns, and I would be happy to answer your questions about Measure 92.
Thank you, Ruth. And thank you for everybody who's joining us today. Welcome to today's telephone town hall. Again, tonight we'll be discussing the facts behind Measure 92 on your ballot this November. If you have a question at any time during the event, please press 0 on the call. Again, on the agenda for tonight's call, we'll be discussing Measure 92 and its impacts on us as Oregon consumers, its impacts on Oregon family farmers, its impacts on Oregon businesses, and its impacts on the Oregon economy as a whole. Our second qualified distinguished speaker is Dana Beaver. Dana Beaver is a consultant to the NOAA 92 Coalition and has studied the public policy impacts of mandatory single-state labeling proposals, such as Measure 92. Dana has presented information related to the science behind GMOs, cost impacts of mandatory labeling proposals, the accuracy and reliability of the information provided by such labels, and the indirect economic impacts for farmers, food producers, taxpayers, and consumers. Hello, Dana.
Thanks, Colin, and thank you, everyone, for joining us for tonight's telephone town hall to talk about Measure 92. As you heard Ruth mention how poorly written the measure is and how it fails on its fundamental promise to provide accurate and reliable information. But there's some other flaws with this measure. And Ruth talked about the cost to consumers, but there's also a cost to taxpayers under Measure 92. Because under this measure, there will be not one, but two state departments that will be responsible for writing hundreds of pages of regulations. And what they'll have to do is they will have to monitor and test around thousands of Oregon family farms and tens of thousands of food products and tens of thousands of stores across the state. That's an enormous cost to Oregon taxpayers. And I should note that under Measure 92, there's no funding source identified for this, nor is there a limit to taxpayer money that can be spent. So it's costly to taxpayers as well as consumers. And, you know, those who get hit the hardest by Measure 92 are Oregon small family farmers. They have to have burdensome requirements that they have to follow. And, in fact, the measure is so strict that it would require these farmers to actually have two sets of equipment, one for their GMO crops and one for their non-GMO crops. they would have to segregate everything from the entire process between planting and harvesting and storage and transporting. And the same is true for small food processors and large food processors around the state as well. They have to segregate everything just for the Oregon food products, keep them separate from food products that go to the other states. So this entire level of segregation is burdensome on family farmers and small businesses and ends up being costly to consumers. So we look forward to answering any questions that you may have tonight and getting the facts out about Measure 92.
Thank you, Dana, and thank you for everybody who's just joining us. Again, welcome to the Measure 92 Town Hall. If you have a question at any time for either of our speakers, please press 0. Our first question tonight comes from Bill from Astoria, who has a question about who is behind Measure 92. Go right ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I'd like to know why this is put on the ballot and what advantage is it to do this. I mean, I'm always been under the impression that our food was okay. It seems like adding something that you don't need.
You know, Bill, you make some really good points there. You know, Measure 92 is this recycled initiative. You know, in fact, it's already been before Oregon voters, and it was rejected by Oregon voters a few years ago. And then this same out-of-state group has shopped it around to find other states to look at it. In fact, California voters rejected it 2 years ago. Washington voters rejected it last year. And it's the exact same flawed initiative that is back in Oregon again. But the fundamental flaws remain the same. It doesn't tell people what's in their food. It does increase the cost of groceries, and it actually conflicts with the 2 nationwide labeling systems that we already have. And we fully recognize that, of course, there are some consumers who may prefer to purchase foods without GMO ingredients in them, and those consumers can look for the organic or non-GMO label. So there just simply isn't a need for this misleading, costly initiative, and that's why our coalition is urging a no vote.
Great. And our next question comes from Teresa Buckley from Dundee. She has a question about corn kernels. Go right ahead, Teresa. Hello, Teresa.
I just saw the commercial on TV again. It's the one where they've got the corn coated before they plant it to keep the bugs away, and they claim that's what's getting in the food. But I have nephews who are farmers, and I know a lot of the people in St. Paul that farm, and a lot of that isn't true. And when they do that commercial, I just want to know if that's a big scare tactic on their part, and if they've already tried to pass this before, why do they keep trying to shove it down our throats? And if they kill the small farmer, they're going to have the government growing their food anyway. So my question is that what they want?
Teresa, this is Dana. I'd be happy to answer your question. You've clearly done some homework on this, and you know farming. It sounds like it's a part of your family. This is the ad that you were referring to. It is just an absolutely deceptive, misleading scare tactic that they're giving to consumers, and I think that is shameful that they're doing that. The current kernels that they're showing on that ad, it's simply a food coloring. It's not related to GMO crops at all. In fact, most all crops have those types of coloring on them. It's just a trait of that they have to identify the kind of crop that it is. But the proponents instead are using it as a scare tactic, and I think that's a shame. But I have to say, to be honest with you, I'm not surprised, because they will do anything other than talk about what's in their initiative. You won't ever find them talking about the fact that they exempted 2/3 of the food that's sold in the state, including food that contains or was made with GMO ingredients. You'll never hear them talk about the fact that we already have 2 nationwide labeling systems that give consumers accurate and reliable information about whether their food was produced with GMO ingredients. That's the non-GMO label and the organic label. You never hear them talk about what a burden this is to the family farmers. You never hear them talk about the fact that small family farmers can be sued under Measure 92 if the words on a label happen to be inaccurate. You'll never hear them talking about that, and instead they've gone to these scare tactics, and I think that's a shame. Instead, we want to get the facts out, because the more people know about Measure 92, we think the more they'll dislike it, and that's why we're urging a no vote.
Thank you so much. And I want to remind folks who are just joining us that, A, welcome to the Measure 92 Town Hall, and B, that you can ask any question by just pressing 0 on your phone at any time. Again, please press 0 on your phone at any time if you have a question. And now we do want to hear from you, so we're going to put a question to you. So our first poll question of the evening is this: what concerns you most about Measure 92? and you can answer on your phone. Please press 1 if you're concerned about the impact on local farmers. Please press 2 if you're concerned about increasing grocery costs. Please press 3 if you're concerned about misleading labels. And please press 4 if all of the above concern you. Again, the question is, what concerns you most about Measure 92? And you can answer by pressing buttons on your phone. Please press 1 if you're concerned about the impact on local farmers. Please press 2 if you're concerned about increasing grocery costs. Please press 3 if you're concerned about misleading labels. And please press 4 if all of the above concern you. And so, again, welcome to the Measure 92 in Town Hall. If you have any questions at all, please press 0 on your phone. The next question goes to Jacob from Hood River, and he has a question about GMO labeling. Please go right ahead, Jacob.
Yes, I'd like to know if they're labeling GMOs, why wouldn't they label everything? Why would they label just some things and have exceptions?
Hi, Jacob.
Well, you know,
this is
Jacob.
Dana.
Oh, go ahead,
Go
Dana.
ahead, Ruth.
Oh,
Go
okay.
ahead, Ruth.
Jacob, I was going to answer your question. You know, as a dietitian, we already have a lot of information on the food label. We have an ingredient label that lists all ingredients in a food product in the order, the percentage they are in the product. And then we have a nutrition facts label, which tells consumers the caloric and the nutritional value of the food. We currently don't have how food was processed on a label. And the problem with Measure 92 is it won't give consumers information that they want of what is really in their food, because many foods would be labeled even if with no GE ingredients, and many others would be exempt even if they do contain GE products. So I think you make a good point. Why do an unnecessary and actually misleading label on foods? And as a dietitian, in my office every day, I see people that are already confused by the nutrition label, and I really don't want to have any more misleading information on the label, and I certainly don't want consumers to have to pay for information on the label that won't give them back any more nutritional value or food safety.
Thank you, Ruth. And again, for folks who are just joining us, please press 0 at any time to ask a question of our two speakers. Our next question goes to Joni, who is from Redmond. Joni, you have a question about who is behind Measure 92. Go right ahead.
Yeah, I had already decided, living in Central Oregon, that I was going to vote no on this measure, and I've had 3 calls tonight alone, and I've had several prior to today, trying to tell me all the reasons that I should vote yes on this. And I keep asking them, you know, what is the group? And I can't get an answer, and I don't know who it is that's pushing this measure.
Joni, this is Dana. I'd be happy to answer your question. First of all, I'd like to start off, though, by thanking you for supporting us with the no vote. You know, this is the same Recycle initiative that the same group of folks has been shopping around. The main funders are Dr. Bronner's Magic Soaps, and he's from California. The other main funder is a company by the name of Mercola, and they're out of Illinois. And they're the same group of folks, and of course there's others, but they're all these out-of-state corporations that have the same group that have been shopping this around to other states. They took it to Oregon years ago. Oregon voters rejected it. California, Washington, all rejected ballot initiatives. And it's the same flawed measure, and now they're just bringing it back to Oregon. It was a bad idea last time Oregon voters shot it down, and it's a nearly identical proposal now, and that's why it deserves a no vote.
Great. And I'm actually going to put a question out there. Why do so many farmers oppose Measure 92? I know you talked a little bit about that, but please expand.
This is Dana. I'd be happy to answer this. You're exactly right. In fact, nearly every major agricultural organization in the state is urging a no vote. It's the Oregon Farm Bureau, it's the local county farm bureaus, it's the Oregon Women for Agriculture. All these organizations are urging a no vote because it hurts Oregon farmers. You know, we talked a little bit about the segregation that's required for farmers, so they'll have to segregate everything from the planting to the harvesting to the storage and the transportation of their crops, and they have to keep everything 100% separate. They have to use separate equipment for everything. That's going to be so costly to farmers. It also opens them up to a whole new level of litigation that they've never faced. Farmers can actually be sued, particularly the small family farmers, when they sell their products at farmers markets or if they sell them at roadside stands. It opens them up to enormous litigation, and that's some of the reasons that farmers are urging a no vote.
Thank you so much, Dana. And again, for folks who are just joining us, please press 0 if you have a question of our speakers at any time. Please press 0 if you would like to ask a question. Our next question goes to Sherry from Salem, who wants to know why Oregon is being targeted by Measure 92. Go right ahead, Sherry.
Yes, I was just wondering why Oregon was being targeted, and if there are any other states, the United States, that have this measure in place. But I think it's partially been answered. It looks like they have tried it before in other states, but it didn't work. Is that correct?
Hey, Sherry, this is Dana. I'd be happy to answer that question. Yes, they've shopped this around to other states, including Oregon, and it's been rejected in every instance. You did ask about, is there other states? The only other state, the Vermont legislature did pass a measure about labeling GMO foods, but it's not enacted right now, and it's actually being contested in court. But here's an interesting point about that. Measure 92 actually conflicts with the Vermont labeling requirements. So already there's a conflict. So what that means is that foods that are sold in Vermont can't be sold in Oregon, and foods that are sold in Oregon can't be sold in Vermont. You can already see where having a state-by-state approach absolutely fails. And instead, that's why labeling standards need to be set at the federal level, as they currently are. That way, every farmer, food producer, and consumer are treated equally. And that's where our two nationwide labeling systems come from. For consumers who are looking for non-GMO foods, they can look for the organic or non-GMO label. Both are reliable and accurate, unlike Measure 92, and that's why the measure deserves a no vote.
Great. Our next question comes from Andrew in Phoenix. Andrew, you have a question about why organic might be a little bit higher priced. Go right ahead.
Yeah, I don't necessarily like the fact that the farmers are genetically modifying produce. That's not, I can grow my own. Since I live in Oregon, we have lovely weather for lots of things. But my question is, things that are on the shelf labeled as organic right now are always higher cost than the other products right now. Why does it cost more to keep things out of food than to add another process to the food that genetically modifies it, of course, then it costs less to do that?
Well, Andrew, that's a good question, and this is Ruth. And organic farming is more expensive for a number of reasons. Oftentimes, organic farmers are smaller farmers, and because they cannot use pesticides or herbicides, and they have smaller yield from their crop, then the prices end up to be higher in the grocery store. It doesn't mean, though, that organic, and I can tell you this as a nutritionist who's studied science for over 35 years, the science of nutrition, organic foods don't necessarily have any more nutritional value than non-organic foods. But consumers do pay a higher price. And one of the things that really concerns me about Ballot Measure 92 is that if foods have to be labeled GMO or contains GMO, even when they may not, because this is such a badly written ballot measure, prices will be higher, as they are with organic foods. And in fact, with GMO crops, often farmers can use fewer pesticides and herbicides, and they get more yield out of their crops. But if this labeling law passes and the price is passed on the consumers, those that are already a little bit food insecure, or in Oregon we have a lot of food insecurity, the cost that could be up to $400 per family of four would be passed on to the consumer. And I know from my business, my practice, many families just cannot afford that. And I was a school lunch dietitian for many years, and in the schools there are many kids that are food insecure and many that are on free and reduced price lunch, and families just can't afford the increased cost that this ballot measure may cause. And you're right, I'm an avid gardener myself, and I have a big organic farm in my backyard, and I love to grow vegetables as you do, and I try to encourage families to do that. But the fact is that Ballot Measure 92 is very badly written, and that's why I urge a no vote.
Right. Again, for folks that want to ask a question, please do press 0 on your phone. If you would like to ask a question of our two speakers, please press 0 and you'll be able to put your question in. Now we're actually going to pose our second question to you, and it's an apropos question based on that last question. And the question is, what actions are you willing to take to protect Oregon farmers? Please press 1 if you'll encourage your friends and families to vote no on Measure 92. Please press 2 if you'll write a letter to the editor about voting no on Measure 92. Please press 3 if you'll share information on Facebook or Twitter about why we should vote no on Measure 92. And please press 4 if you'll do all of the above. Again, the question is, what actions are you willing to take to protect Oregon farmers? Please press 1 on your phone if you'll encourage your friends and families to vote no on Measure 92. Please press 2 if you'll write a letter. If you will write a letter to the editor about voting no on Measure 92. Please press 3 if you'll share information on Facebook or Twitter about why we should vote no on Measure 92. Please press 4 if you'll do all of the above. And again, if you have any question at all of our two speakers, please press 0. And moving on to our next question, we are going to take a question from Annabelle from Medford, who has a question about the price of labels. Please go ahead, Annabelle.
Yes, I was wondering, aren't these the GMO people of organic food pushing this label thing?
Hi, Annabelle. This is Dana. I'd be happy to answer that. Yes, it does have a large the component of the Yes campaign is the organic crowd, and they really, they want to put a label on their competitor's product, and what that ends up doing is it drives up the cost of food for everybody, and that's what the problem is. And when you have high costs for all food, you reduce consumer choice. And right now, consumers have a wide variety of choice. They can choose foods that are organic or non-GMO. Both of those are accurately labeled by our 2 federal labeling standards. There's also price choices for consumers right now. Measure 92 takes all of that away, and the fact that it takes away consumer choice in terms of price points because the price of food will go up under Measure 92, and it just simply doesn't provide them any new or reliable or accurate information about their food, and I think that's where it fails consumers, and it's why it deserves a no vote.
Our next question comes from Eden in Southern Oregon, and who has a question about how this is going to impact local farmers. Please go ahead.
I want to know how it's going to impact the local farmers and how we're going to support them through the high prices without any assistance.
That's an excellent point, and I think that's one of the main reasons that you're going to find that nearly every major agricultural organization in the state is urging a no vote, because this really hurts Oregon farmers, which in turn, of course, hurts the Oregon economy. I mean, Oregon farmers are a big economic driver in the state of Oregon, and this really puts them at a competitive disadvantage because the way Measure 92 is written, it has what's called a zero tolerance, and what that means is that farmers who are selling in the state of Oregon have to have completely separate systems for GMO crops and non-GMO crops. You can't so much as use a combine, or heck, you can't even use the same shovel in those fields because there is a zero tolerance under Measure 92. So there is an enormous burden for farmers to have to duplicate their farming equipment. That's where the cost comes. And then also at the liability exposure. That really gets at the small family farmer, the farmer who's selling at a roadside stand, the farmer who's selling at a farmer's market, the farmer who produces a product such as a jam or a jelly. That increases their liability significantly under Measure 92, and it's why they're urging a no vote.
Great. And our next question comes from Terry from Dallas. Terry, you have a question about how this might impact people who sell at farmers markets. Go right ahead.
Well, I guess the last caller stole a little bit of my thunder, but that's okay. I'm actually just me, myself. A neighbor is urging me to grow some of my lettuce for a Salem Saturday market, and will this labeling? Will we have to comply with this labeling just, on a small scale, a smaller grower?
You know what, Terry? You actually would. You're 100% liable under Measure 92. You would be following the same owner's liability that everybody else should be. Where it even gets worse, I think, for particularly the small family farmers who are selling at these, like we were talking about the roadside stands, they're the ones who face the liability. It's surprisingly as if the proponents went out of their way to create the liability for the small family farmers, but not necessarily the big farmers who don't sell at farmers markets. Instead, the way they wrote the initiative is that if there's any inaccuracies in any of the labeling at any part, the small family farmer at the farmers market or the farm stand, they're held liable. I think that is just one of the main reasons that you're going to find agricultural organizations from across the state urging a no vote. There's just simply no exemption for farmers at farmers markets.
Our next question comes from Alice from Klamath Falls. Alice, you have a question about the difference between hybrid plants and GMOs. Please go ahead.
Yes, I would like to know what the differentiations is between hybrids and genetically engineered.
Hi, Alice. This is Ruth. We've actually been eating foods that have been hybrid or cross-pollinated for years and years, and that's been a process that takes a number of years, and we know that those plants provide a lot of good nutrition to our diet, and the difference between those and GMOs is new technology has just allowed scientists to be able to take just one gene from a plant and transfer it into the other so that we can get a result in the plant, whether better nutrition or need for less water, that maybe a hybridization process would take years to accomplish. And so it's really allowed for us to have many different foods into our food supply that provide a lot more varieties of nutrition, which are good for us all.
Great. And our next question comes from Emily in Jefferson, and she has a question about the cost. Emily, please go ahead.
Hi, I was just wondering if it is rising costs for our organic foods, wouldn't it be good for the farmers because they would be getting more income from their organic foods in the stores, even though they have added the GMO labeling?
Well, Emily, I'd be happy to answer that question. This is Dana. You know, when you hear the proponents talk about the cost behind Measure 92, they conveniently and frankly absurdly talk about it only in terms of the labeling costs, as if the cost of Measure 92 starts and stops with printing a label and putting it on a package, when that is utterly ridiculous. The costs of Measure 92 come from a couple of different areas. It's really about the segregation that's required, as we were talking about, from the farmer standpoint. They've got to start at the farmer. You've got to keep all those crops completely separate. You've got to have two different sets of equipment. Then it has to be segregated and specially handled at a food processor. Foods that just are GMO food ingredients and ones without GMO ingredients. You've got to have two separate processing plants for those kinds of foods because of the zero tolerance. And then the distribution. There's Oregon foods, and then there's foods that go to other states. Because remember, you can't sell the same box of cereal in Idaho that you can sell in Oregon under Measure 92. So all that segregation, it comes with cost. That gets passed down to consumers. The other cost to consumers comes in the form of ingredient substitution. Because what companies will have to do to avoid putting on a misleading and inaccurate label is they will actually have to remake their products just for the state of Oregon with higher-priced non-GMO ingredients. And that's where the costs come from for consumers. So, you know, if this was a beneficial measure to farmers in any way, you wouldn't find farmers opposing it so much. But instead, all it does is create a tremendous amount of cost onto farmers, and all those costs continue to get pushed down to consumers.
Great. Thank you so much. And I want to remind anybody who has a question for our two speakers, please press 0. Again, if you have any question, please press 0. Our next question is to Rick, who is in Mill City. Rick, please go ahead.
Yes, ma'am. I was wondering if I missed something here, or has anybody come up with a legitimate study saying there is anything wrong with these GMOs?
Hi, Rick. This is Ruth, and as a dietitian who follows nutrition research every single day, I can promise you no one has found anything bad about GMOs. In fact, we know nutritionally that GMO and non-GMO foods are exactly the same nutritionally, provide the same benefits to our diet. And we also know that there have been over 1,700 studies that have found no negative health effects of GMOs. So that's why we're urging a no vote on 92, because I'm really afraid that this bill that is so badly written is going to scare consumers away from foods that they will provide wonderful nutrition to their diet and for their families.
Thank you so much. And again, if you have any questions of our speakers, please press 0 on your phone at any time. Please press 0 on your phone at any time. And we're going to put our third question to you. And our third question is this. Most people will receive their ballots in the coming days. When do you plan to fill out your ballot to vote no on 92 and send it in? Please press 1 on your phone if you'll fill it out and send it in this week. Please press 2 if you'll send it in next week. Please press 3 if you'll send it in right before the election. Again, the question is, most people will receive their ballots in the coming days. When do you plan to fill out your ballot to vote no on 92 and send it in? Please press 1 if you'll fill it out and send it in this week. Please press 2 if you'll send it in next week. Please press 3 if you'll send it in right before the election. So again, if you are just joining us, or if you have any questions, please press 0 at any time to ask a question. Our next question goes to Jolene of Grants Pass. Jolene, please ask your question.
Hi.
Hello.
When you look at the people who are saying for us to vote no, you're looking at big business, and we're talking Monsanto, Pepsi-Cola, Coca-Cola, Kraft Foods, and you're thinking that, okay, there's a lot of they're shoveling a lot of money in for this no vote. I'm personally going to vote no, but how do I convince my husband, who thinks labeling foods is a good thing? How do I get him convinced? Because when he sees all these big corporations that that don't want this labeling, he just thinks that they're just out because it's, money for that they don't want to have to pay out to relabel things. So how do I get him to convince that this measure, a no vote, is a good thing?
Hi, Jolene. This is Dana. I'm happy to help you with that. And first of all, I want to thank you for your support in voting no on Measure 92. When we talk about the funders of our campaign, yeah, they're bigger companies, but you know what? They're in this fight because they are protecting and representing their customers, and their customers are Oregon farmers and Oregon consumers. Oregon family farmers are overwhelmingly opposed to this. I mean, you can find organizations like the Oregon Farm Bureau and local county farm bureaus from across the state, and the Oregon Retail Association, which represents small businesses, and the Northwest Food Processors Association, which represents small businesses throughout the region. You're going to find an enormous coalition of consumers, taxpayers, and businesses and agriculture who's urging a no vote on Measure 92. And, so you mentioned that your husband thinks that foods should be labeled. Well, you might want to let him know that actually 2/3 of the food that's sold in the state gets a special exemption, and it won't be labeled. And that includes foods that are sold that are either made with or contain with GMO ingredients, but they just happen to get a special exemption. An example of that would be meat and all dairy products that come from animals that were fed GE grains and injected with GE medications. They don't have a label on them only because they just happen to get a special exemption. Also, products are only labeled depending on where you buy them. If you go buy a can of pop and a bag of chips at a deli, well, they won't be labeled only because they get a special exemption. But the exact same can of pop and bag of chips at the grocery store would have to have a label. So if your husband's looking for labeling, Measure 92 simply won't provide it to him. Instead, he can look for products with organic or non-GMO. Those are reliable and accurate, and that's the information that consumers need and deserve. Measure 92 fails them.
Our next question comes from Sherry in Dallas, and she has some concerns about the way Measure 92 is written. Please go ahead, Sherry.
Okay, I'm definitely a no vote on it anyway, but one of the questions I had is that because I was listening, they were talking about the different ingredients that would have to go in based on state by state. What happens to the items that we get that come from out of the country? Basically, I buy USA. I believe that's how we should be anyway. But do they get an exemption?
Hi, Sherry. This is Dana. I'd be happy to answer that question. First of all, thank you for your support in urging a no and giving a no vote. We appreciate that. If products that are sold in the state, if they're exported from other states or other countries, they still have the same labeling requirements that the companies from in-state would have to comply with. But here's the kicker, and here's what's really, I think, is unfair, particularly for the Oregon farmers and food producers. All it is required from companies that are importing food into Oregon is they just have to simply sign a statement saying, yep, there's no GMO ingredient in it, and that's it. But instead, what happens to the Oregon farmers and the Oregon food processors and Oregon retailers, they're under the watchful eye of not one but two state agencies that will be responsible for testing and enforcing this. And they will be doing that at local farms. They will be at thousands of farms and inspecting tens of thousands of products in the stores across the state. That's thousands of stores. All that compliance is costly. And that's where we get into the real cost to taxpayers. In fact, the Department of Administrative Services has estimated that this is going to cost at least $14 million every budget cycle. And yet Measure 92 doesn't provide a funding source, and nor does it even provide a limit of taxpayer resources that can be spent. That's the problem with it. And that's why it's costly, and yet it doesn't provide consumers with accurate or reliable information. That's why it deserves a no vote.
Our next question comes from Lori. Lori, you have a question about what may be the actual benefits of the yes vote, and really what do we get from a label? Please go ahead.
Yes, I was wondering what actual change would be made on the label, and also what is the benefit that the promoting companies are pushing for? What is in it for them?
Hi, Lori. Thank you for your question. This is Ruth. As a dietitian, we have right now really good nutrition labels that tell us not only the name of the food, but an ingredient list that lists ingredients by order of the percentage they're in a product. And we also have a nutrition facts label that tells us the nutritional value of a food. What Measure 92 would do is require, if there's any ingredient in any percentage in a food, it won't list GMO or GE by that ingredient or what percentage it is in the food, which would be more common under federal labeling laws, but it would require a label on the front or the back of the package that says contains GMO or may contain GMO. And the problem with that is that label will be on products even if there's no GMO in some foods, and there will be a lot of foods that will be exempt from that label even if they do contain GE products such as meat and dairy. So, as a dietitian, I find so many consumers that are already confused by the nutrition label, and this is going to be very misleading on the label, and it won't tell consumers if there's a change in the nutritional value, like the current Nutrition Facts does, and it won't list, a percentage of the ingredient that's in a food like our current nutrition label does. So,
Ruth, you're exactly right on that. And the other point I think that is important to make on this is that, this is just these are some out-of-state groups that have been trying to shop around this failed initiative for years. They brought it to Oregon voters years ago, and they rejected it. California voters rejected it 2 years ago. Washington voters rejected it last year. It's the same flawed measure, but they're just shopping it around state by state to see if they can get this thing passed. And I think that's a shame, because what it ends up doing is just giving misleading information and increasing the cost of groceries.
Our next question is from Tony from Jacksonville. Tony, please go right ahead with your question.
I am a no voter and have been from day one. What I want to know is, if this should pass with the yes votes, who are the big winners? It's definitely not the consumers, and it's not the farmers.
That's right, Tony. It's not the consumers. It's not the farmers. It's also not the taxpayers. I think the ones who we'll talk about the winners in a moment, but I think the one we really talk about is who ends up losing. I think it's people who really want to know if their food contains GMO ingredients, and I think they really lose out because they won't find out that information under Measure 92 because of all these special exemptions and these loopholes. They don't win. Taxpayers don't win because they have to enforce this. With existing state revenue, will have to pay for this. $14 million a year. And consumers as well will pay for this because higher grocery prices and Oregon family farmers get hurt. There's really nobody who wins by this measure, and that's why we think it deserves a no vote. The promoters have an agenda, and it's biased and misleading, and they're just trying to hoist this on Oregon consumers, and that's unfair.
So I'm going to put a question to our two speakers. There are existing labels out there that basically help us with choices when it comes to what we're discussing here with Measure 92. Can you please tell the difference between Measure 92 and what's out there already?
Sure. This is Ruth. We already have federal labeling standards that very clearly lead the consumer who want foods without GMOs to a label, two different ones. First, there's organic, and organic foods cannot have GE or GMO ingredients in them. And also there is non-GMO labeling. And right now there's already over 20,000 products in the grocery store for consumers who want no GE in their food and those that can afford to pay for it. And the problem with Measure 92 is it will increase the cost for consumers who may not be able to pay for the increased cost of these foods. And it really won't give an accurate message of what's in the food.
Great. Our next question comes from Emma. Emma, please go right ahead with your question. Hello, Emma? Emma, please go ahead. All right. We lost Emma. Our next question actually then will be Ron from LeGrand. Ron, can you please go ahead with your question?
Yes. I received a call last night from the proponents of this measure, and they were very convincing, and at the end of the conversation, I was ready to vote for yes, and after listening to you guys, I'm ready to vote no. Is there a possibility that people like me who are sitting on the fence on this could hear a debate between the proponents and the people who are so capable as you guys are of pointing out some of the details about why we should not vote for this?
Hi, Ron. This is Dana. I would be happy to answer that question. Yes, there have been debates, and there are more debates. And in fact, you can find, for example, on Oregon Public Broadcasting, there was a radio debate that was, in fact, I was a part of that, and that was back in last month. So you can check that out online on Oregon Public Broadcasting. At the same time, there's other forums coming up. In fact, there's one next week where there'll be a debate, and again, I think it'll be covered on Coin TV in Portland area, as well as Oregon Public Broadcasting may also post that on their site as well. But there's been a number of debates that we've done on this issue through the radio and in front of editorial boards as well. You know, the major newspapers from around the state hear from each side, oftentimes at the same time in the same room. And actually, there's been 6 papers that have editorialized on this, and every single one of them has urged a no vote on Measure 92. Another debate that already occurred, but I know you're looking for something in the future, but I think it's important to note that the Citizens Initiative Review Panel, this is a group that heard from both sides over the 4 days and extensively studied Measure 92, and they, after extensive analysis, concluded that Measure 92 deserves a no vote. So it seems that the more the people have the facts about Measure 92, the less they like it when they realize how misleading and costly it is. So I'd encourage you to check out Oregon Public Broadcasting. You'll find some debates on there.
Great. Our next question comes from Steve in Grants Pass, who would like an example about how Measure 92 is actually misleading. Go ahead, Steve.
Yes, thank you. I'm looking presently at a flyer that was mailed to us by it was by No on the 92 Coalition, and that flyer contains this statement: some foods would be labeled GE even when they are not. So my question is, What is an example of a food which has no GMO ingredients but would be required to be labeled as GMO?
Hi, Steve. This is Ruth, dietitian. I'd be happy to answer your question. I can give you two examples offhand. The first is soy oil, and the second is beet sugar. When the soy or the beets are genetically engineered, the genetically engineered or GE component, the gene is in the protein part of the food. And, of course, soy oil and beet sugar, neither of them have protein in it. So there would be no GE in either of those products, yet they would have to be labeled GE. So to me, that's very misleading. And also under this ballot measure, about 2/3 of the foods we eat would be exempt from labeling, even if they do have GE in the food. And those would be a lot of packaged foods and to-go foods sold by restaurants, food served in restaurants, and meat and dairy, where the animals are fed genetically engineered feed and grain, and we are, in fact, eating the protein from the meat and the dairy products. So those are two examples.
And I'm going to put one more very important question to our two speakers, because this really does impact us all as Oregonians. Please kind of reiterate or speak on the fact that the cost to us as consumers and the cost to Oregon if Measure 92 was to pass.
This is Dana. I'd be happy to answer that, because I think this is one of the most important issues, because not only getting bad information, but you got to pay more for it at the grocery store, and that hardly makes any sense. And so when you have a single state labeling policy and food has to be specially handled and specially made or specially labeled just for one state, that's where the enormous costs are, and that's where we really get to the cost of this. And also to state taxpayers as well. It's not just at the grocery store, but it's also on tax day, because this is going to cost, according to the Department of Administrative Services, it'll be over $14 million a year to enforce this, because you've got to have testing at all the farms and all the food products and in the retailers around the state. Those are real costs that are just completely unnecessary, because consumers can look for non-GMO foods by looking for the organic or non-GMO label.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And we're going to give our two great speakers an opportunity to kind of give some closing remarks here about Measure 92 and what the impact is here in Oregon. I'll go ahead and start with Ruth. Go ahead, Ruth.
Well, thank you. Again, as a registered dietitian and nutritionist who is really in the trenches every day trying to help my clients and Oregon consumers, feed themselves and their families in a healthful way, we already have existing labels that provide reliable ways to choose products that are made without GMOs, and those are organic and non-GMO. We already have food regulations that are set at the federal level that are more fair to the farmers and small businesses and food producers, because they're all treated equally. And so, again, as a dietitian, where my main concerns are nutritional value of food and that we can feed more Oregonians at a cost that's reasonable to families, I really urge a no vote on Measure 92.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening and having a really thorough discussion on Measure 92 and the failings of it. And, when you really boil this down, it's all costs and no benefits. And at the same time, it's bad for consumers and it's bad for Oregon family farmers. And farmers are a huge economic driver to the Oregon economy, and this places an enormous burden on them. It exposes them to litigation that they've never had to face before. It requires duplication of farming equipment in order just to keep farming the crops that they currently do. It's unfair to family farmers, and that's why they've joined the coalition with other Oregon consumers and taxpayers and small businesses in urging a no vote. And we appreciate your time tonight. Thank you, everyone.
We absolutely appreciate your time. Thank you to all of you who have joined us this evening to learn the true facts behind Measure 92. If you want to learn a little bit more, please do visit factsabout92.com or vote no on 92.com to get some more in-depth information about how Measure 92 can negatively impact Oregon. We also encourage you to please get your ballots in, mail your ballots in as soon as possible. And also, if you have a question or a comment that you would like to leave, here for us. There will be an opportunity to do so at the end of this call. So again, thank you so much for joining us. And again, please vote no on Measure 92. Have a fantastic evening.